Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, September 4th, 2014 here. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Scott is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, if you've had the corporate media on this morning, the big news all over the place is that comedian Joan Rivers has passed away from her recent medical event, as it were, and they're just all over the media with this. And I have to be very, very honest. For some strange reason, I'm not feeling anywhere near as upset over this as I did with Robin Williams' tragic passing. But at this point, between Joan Rivers and the McDonald conviction, the media has all the material they need to keep us bedazzled and distracted away from the economy, the wars, Ukraine, Iraq, Ebola, NSA scandal, IRS scandal, EPA scandal, all the rest of that stuff, and we are being conditized well and truly right now. Now, of course, a week from today is the 13th anniversary of 9/11, and today U.S. intelligence, and I use that term loosely, U.S. intelligence agencies are now claiming a total of 12 jets are missing from the airport in Tripoli, Libya. I'm not sure how they would know that, because none of the airlines involved have said, hey, we're short an airplane. And right now, the Libyan people are not going to be very sympathetic to CIA types walking around that airport. So we know that prior to 9/11, one of the scenarios being planned as a false flag involved multiple jetliners in multiple cities. And we also know that the U.S. government needs to come up with some kind of a reason to go back in Libya, because they can't let the Libyan people be in control of their own country, or Libya's oil will be sold for currencies other than the U.S. dollar. Now, story coming out of Global Research, U.S. and NATO step up military preparations against Russia. They're just grinding ahead as fast as they can and just getting ready to fling money and other people's children into the fray here. David Cameron is warning Great Britain will not rule out military action in Iraq. And my response to that, as always, is, okay, David, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. We ran out of the desert camo, but here's a bright day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA torture centers. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we will call Iraq and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. Because we remember how we were all tricked into the first invasion of Iraq with lies about stolen Kuwaiti incubators. We remember how we were tricked into the second invasion of Iraq with lies about Saddam's nuclear weapons and your predecessor's dodgy dossier. So under the prudent assumption that we are being lied to yet again to trick us into a third invasion of Iraq, you will understand if we choose to sit this one out and keep our children safe at home. So have fun. Cameron is also out there saying ramp up sanctions on Putin even if it hurts the city of London, claiming Russia needs Europe more than the other way around. And the indications are that that is simply not true, but they're trying to crank that up. Now, over in Ukraine, things are not going well for Poroshenko. Apparently, the Independent Republic of Donetsk is on the verge of recapturing their own airport, which would give them a tremendous advantage for air operations and limit the ability of Kiev to project air power into the region. However, there's a new development. Yesterday we were talking about how Vladimir Putin had come up with this 7-step plan for peace. And at the moment, it looks like it's moving forward. And Kiev and the eastern Ukrainian republics have agreed that if this thing moves forward, they mutually agree to a ceasefire on tomorrow. And they're moving ahead on this. Now, these 7 steps Putin laid out, we told you about them yesterday, and they make very great deal of sense. I think in their private meeting, Putin offered Poroshenko an economic lifeline to help solve Kiev's financial problems rather than plunge them even deeper into debt, which is what the IMF is trying to do. And I think Poroshenko's going to take it. And once again, Putin will have pulled the rug right out from under the U.S. war agenda. And I'm sure Washington, D.C. and Wall Street are all upset about this. You know, we can't have this. We've worked hard for this war. We deserve it. Nobody will take it away from me. And as a result of this, Obama has issued his own demands regarding the Ukraine ceasefire deal. Now, this is imperial arrogance on display. Obama doesn't really have anything to say what Kiev and the eastern Ukrainian republics, or for that matter Moscow, are doing. And his first demand was that Russia admit that they were engaged militarily in eastern Ukraine, which Putin is never going to do, and there's no evidence to support it. And this is a demand by Obama clearly intended to derail this deal from happening. But Putin and possibly Poroshenko will probably tell Obama it's none of his business anyway, and this seems to already be happening because Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov came out and basically said this is illegal. This is politically wrong. This is legally wrong. And one country cannot arbitrarily, unilaterally amend a collective document signed by 28 states. So Russia just told Obama to shove his requirements where the sun don't shine. We're going to take a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I hate to tell everybody that's listening, but there's not going to be no peace because the United States, the EU, they're dying empires, and they need this before the 2016. Russia's rebuilding their forces to match or exceed the EU and the United States, and they're going to start this war no matter what. So that's the bottom line.
They're going to start a war, but it looks to me like, you know, the focus is already shifting back to having to do a third invasion of Iraq. They got to come up with a reason for a second invasion of Libya, and maybe the White House is pulling back and realizing selling the American people 3 new wars at the same time, just months ahead of the midterm elections, is not a smart idea. And they may put Russia and Ukraine on hold for a while. But unfortunately, sadly, you are correct. Washington, D.C. and Wall Street have just corrupted themselves into this hopeless corner where the only way out is a major global war, rolling the dice that we can prevail. And unfortunately, I don't see the United States as able to win, even if it goes to the nuclear theater. I don't see the U.S. as winning this latest war.
No, I did a lot of research, and we won't win conventionally. I mean, it's in their backyard.
Yes.
I mean, and China will get involved, you know, and to even try to win, you'd use nuclear weapons, and they would use nuclear weapons. So in the end, the money junkies would have nothing.
Well, they would own whatever was left over, and that may be good enough for them. But you're absolutely right. America's very expensive ballistic missile defense system isn't working much better than the F-35 or the F-22 for that matter, and it's all based on a doctrine of a predictable ballistic inbound track for the warhead. And both Russia and China have now given their upper stage delivery vehicles the ability to maneuver, to dipsy-doodle and corkscrew and flip up and down, which makes a ballistic intercept impossible. And we have been seeing the actual performance stats for these systems like Patriot or Iron Dome. They're like missing 90% of the intercepts. And all Russia or China has to do is fire 2 nuclear weapons at an American target, and the odds are at least one of them is going to get through. So, yeah, we're on the path to absolute insanity here. Dustin, got to let you go. The phone lines are loading up. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to the phone lines here, a story that you all need to keep in mind as this whole Ukraine situation moves forward. Observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe have issued a statement that over the last 2 weeks, which is when the U.S. government and Britain and all these other countries were screaming about Russian aggression, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, their observers on the ground in eastern Ukraine have not seen any Russian troops, any Russian artillery, any Russian aircraft violate the border. They have seen them on Russia's side of the border, in particular helicopters, and of course the humanitarian aid convoys, but no military presence whatsoever. It's just not there. Obama was lying to you again. Cameron was lying to you again. Harper was lying to you again. All right, back to the phones. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yeah, I've been looking at various stories about Mariupol and these explosions that's been taking place at regular intervals. According to my friend, who shall be nameless again, these are special forces that's going into Mariupol and destroying tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery pieces of the Ukrainian army. And what their intention is to degrade the ability of the Ukrainians in Mariupol from fighting any real resistance, in fact. So I think basically we're looking at the collapse of another town. According to this gentleman I'm speaking to, they are all, the Novorossiya army are already in Mariupol's suburbs, and they're advancing slowly towards the center.
Well, there's no question. There's no question that they're gaining ground. And as a matter of fact, one of the points made on Putin's peace plan was to have everybody pull back to a distance where artillery can't be used, and it makes a lot of sense that way. But what's going on here is that the Donetsk is almost back in charge of their own airport. And Poroshenko is losing, and that's why I think he's going to grab this lifeline that Putin is offering to him, and hopefully there'll be an agreement tomorrow, and all of this will be pretty much over.
Yeah, I'm not convinced, because Yatsenyuk, the Prime Minister, has got a complete alternative view to that, and I don't know how reliable that is, but there's it's still a very dangerous situation.
There's no question about that at all, because we know that there are other players inside this area that are still loyal to the U.S. or European Union agenda that are going to be trying to find some way to make this thing fall apart. Obviously, Obama's trying to do that with his unilateral amendments to this Kiev agreement. And what's really interesting, though, and this is another classic case of blowback here, because there's an article that came out of scgnews.com. WikiLeaks has released copies of cables that report that Poroshenko has been working for the U.S. State Department since 2006. He was their man in Ukraine. And that's why he got promoted to the presidency following the coup d'etat. But it looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, it looks like Putin has offered Poroshenko an economic lifeline to get Kiev out of debt rather than plunge it further into debt to the IMF. And I think Poroshenko's going to go for it. Now, will that lead to his ouster? We don't know. But the whole situation is definitely out of control. Okay?
Well, is that... Yeah, well, I think these betrayed Ukrainian troops, they have been betrayed by their leadership. I think Poroshenko's days are numbered regardless, because as they go home, the reality of their combat situation and the support they were receiving
we're already seeing videos. We're already seeing videos of that. The Maidan protests are starting back up again. It's a repeat of January. Only this time, of course, the U.S. government is saying, "Oh no, you can't challenge that government here. This is not democracy in action." Anyway, John, I got to let you go. The phone lines are loaded up. We're going to switch over to Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, 11 missing jetliners. I
12.
mean, how does this happen?
12.
You just you walk out one day and you start doing inventory every day, and we're missing one today, we're missing another one, and when you get to the magic number of 12, then you kind of open your mouth and report the news. You got 11 missing jetliners.
Well, again, I have to scratch my head on this one, because none of the airlines that were flying into Tripoli have gone public saying we are missing an aircraft, and obviously that's a very expensive asset. and they don't keep a lot of spares on hand. They're going to have to reshuffle their flight schedules in order to cover that missing piece of hardware. It's the same thing when there's a major problem with an aircraft and it has to go in for unscheduled maintenance. They start having to move the hardware around to cover that slot. We're not hearing that from any of the airlines that we're serving in Tripoli. And so I'm wondering why this story is being sold, and it was originally 11 unaccounted for passenger jets out of Tripoli. Now they've upped it to 12. We're a week away from 9/11, and obviously that would be a really good time for a new false flag, because otherwise the independent media is going to be reprising all the reasons for suspecting that 9/11 was another hoax executed by the U.S. government and Israel. And they need something to drive that out of the public's attention. And Joan Rivers, isn't going to last for another week.
Yeah, I agree. The two beheadings that the networks have been showing, which all happened supposedly, if they're even true, I think they're fabricated. I don't buy it. But they happened in 2013, and suddenly they just kind of grasp it all and say, okay, now is the right time to show this. So, along with the false flag event, something really horrific, something big, those two other videos aren't going to be enough to launch their invasion yet. It's not enough, but something else is coming big, no doubt about it.
Well, I'm still thinking that there's going to be a virtual 9/11, a takedown of the net and the banking system to be blamed on Russia, China, whoever, because we're still hearing all this. This whole thing about nude celebrity photos being hacked from the iCloud, it's another way of saying, computer hackers, bad hackers, and yet the obvious question, why isn't NSA finding these guys? Maybe it's the NSA. But they've been pushing that whole thing where Wall Street is saying their systems are wide open to cyber attack. Well, how long has Wall Street been using computers, and how long have there been cyber terrorists and criminals in operation? If their systems aren't secure now, they never will be. But it just sounds like they're pre-selling this idea that the whole financial computer system is somehow vulnerable and wide open to some kind of a terror attack. And I'm not buying that one.
Did you catch the Fox News McCain slip up when he talked about his national security team? We're all in agreement that they should arm and fund ISIS? Did you catch that?
I caught that. It's all over the web here right now, and kind of wondering, is McCain going to ask for that $550 million back that they gave to them? And like I said, ISIS was created to use against Assad. Now they've gone rogue. It's a classic case of blowback, and we're in a mess. Steve, got to let you go. Got to take a couple of commercials here, and we'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm looking at the corporate media, and they have started to move away from reporting constantly about Joan Rivers and former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. They're back to pushing ISIS all the time. ISIS is coming to get you unless you let us get them first, which is a replay of how Adolf Hitler tricked Germany into invading Poland, staged a fake terror attack at the radio station in Gleiwitz, Germany, said Poland is invading, and marched him off into war. Now, these days, of course, people have enough common sense to say, look, if Poland was invading, they'd take more than just a single radio station in a single city. Same argument we had for all this talk about a Russian invasion of Ukraine. If Russia was really invading Ukraine, they would have been in Kiev inside of a week. So, anyway, we're going to go back to the phones here. James in Japan. Ohio gozaimasu. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Ohio gozaimasu. It's actually very early. It's like, 5 in the morning.
Yes.
And you're working from 5 to 8 now at GCN, and takes a little time for me to wake up at my age to listen to you because it's my favorite show in the world, but after a couple months of therapy, I'll get over it and be able to handle it properly.
Well, I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get ready for the show, so.
Well, you're a lot more energetic than me, and I'm also happy that you got like your 3 days off with Claire, and you were able to do stuff with your computer and everything else. So
yeah, it's almost back to what I need it to be. Anyway, what else is going on?
I want to just talk about Ukraine and ISIS and Syria. I think the whole thing in Ukraine, in my opinion, is just a scam. It's a scam to bog Russia down to not be able to protect Syria anymore.
Or
they
Iran.
hit them so hard.
Or Iran. Remember, Iran is still a major target for the U.S. war.
Not Iran. Not Iran first. I think Syria, because Syria was where America wanted to go in. They did the whole fake thing with the chemical weapons, and America finally said, "Hey, if they would get rid of them, we wouldn't attack him." And then Putin came in and said, "Okay, well," he made the agreement where they would take them out, and he stopped the U.S. from attacking Syria. Now it's at a different point where America has trained ISIS, and they're finally doing all these atrocities. And I think this is very on a limited scale, even in Iraq. Like, as you said, I think a lot of it is more by the tribes. But ISIS just does some kind of very spectacular things for the media. And now they're back in Syria, so this is going to give America a very great chance to go into Syria to.
Oh yeah, they're already talking about it. I mean,
under the pretense of attacking ISIS.
That's right.
But I don't believe they're going to attack ISIS. They're going to move ISIS right into Damascus and try and get rid of Assad.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. Now, let me talk here for a minute here, because you need to look at the linkages. The reason for going into Syria is because Syria and Iran have a mutual defense treaty. And by going into Syria, the U.S. is hoping to goad Iran into some kind of an overt act that would open the door for an invasion of Iran. Iran is the real prize. If you go back and you look at General Wesley Clark's list of the targets of this whole war for Bretton Woods and the petrodollar, the largest, most potent target there was Iran. And in order to be able to successfully invade Iran, the U.S. was trying to find some way to prevent Russia from being able to intervene and support Iran. And one way, of course, is keeping the situation tense in Afghanistan to close off those land routes. And they were trying to kick up this war with Georgia and Ossetia to close those tunnels coming through the Caucasus Mountains, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And so I think this whole idea of getting a war going in eastern Ukraine against Russia was to tie Russia up there in order to then go into Iran without fear of major Russian intervention.
I think what you're saying about Iran, that's the second step. But the first step is to take out Syria. And I think it's all about Syria right now, because that is exactly where the drones are going, and they want to, put flights over, and they're not going to bomb.
Well, if nothing
ISIS,
else was
example,
going on,
they didn't bomb ISIS in Iraq. They bombed other places.
They have been bombing. They
fields.
have been bombing ISIS in Iraq because ISIS has gone rogue. If there were no other considerations, yes, Syria is the next target on the list. Unfortunately, the U.S. is having to put some fires out. We're talking about Iraq, where the Iraqi people are getting ready to kick out their U.S. puppet government, so the U.S. is having to sell the third invasion of Iraq. Down in Libya, the Libyan people have pretty much kicked out their U.S. puppet regime. So now the U.S. has to put out the fire there and get Libya back in. And because of that, they're kind of scattered and diffused all over the game board here. And that's what's making
Did Libya stop the central bank?
I don't know what they've done with their central bank yet, but the U.S.-approved parliament has had to step down, and Libya's formed a whole new government. It's being labeled Islamist to demonize them, but it's a whole new parliament, and it's going to be less an issue of the central bank than what currency Libya's oil is being sold for. James, I got another call I want to get to before the commercial break. We're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Frank in London. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Once again, I just wanted to talk about our good friend John McCain.
Yes.
I just want to find out if he can be indicted. I mean, this guy was seen in photo shoots with the al-Baghdadi, and the rest of them. I thought he could have been indicted for really a conspiracy to commit mass genocide, really.
Well, he should be, but, this is the face of U.S. interventionism, where the U.S. is going in and creating these radical groups to overthrow unfriendly governments and put in friendly governments, and they've been doing it since the end of World War II. It's just now the world understands that that's what's been going on, and the intervention policy is coming to an end because Ukraine has changed the dynamics. And the new dynamic is, yeah, you can come in and overthrow the government and put a U.S. puppet in our capital city, but that doesn't mean the rest of us have to go along with it. We're just going to break off and form a whole new country without you. And that is why the U.S. Is desperate to find a resolution to keep Ukraine in one piece, because if these eastern Ukrainian republics succeed in breaking off, then that's going to set the model for the next country the U.S. goes in and overthrows the government. It'll just break off. And that whole point of that whole method of interventionism is simply not going to work any longer.
Yes, well, we'll have an interesting winter coming up. That's all I can say.
Absolutely. It's going to be a very interesting, very cold winter here. Going to let you go, and we're going to fit in Steve in Florida before the commercial break. Steve, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I was wanting to ask you, whatever happened to Sarkozy and those charges brought against him for embezzling and what all he was doing? I don't even know.
I think,
do you know?
No, I haven't been following that, because once he's out of office, I tend not to follow these things along. I'll take a look during the commercial break and see if I can find anything. But I do know that French popular support for Hollande is in decline right now, because he's on board with this whole war agenda, and the people of the world are just sick of all these pro-war governments. It's just really reached a point where everybody wants this stuff. We've had enough of war. It's time to call this one off, declare victory even if you're not victorious, and bring our kids home. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the program, 1 week from today is the 13th anniversary of 9/11, and I remember for the 10th anniversary, Claire and I managed to come up with the resources to go to New York and take part in some of the 10th anniversary commemorations, if you will, which was a rare treat, because how often does a political blogger get to perform off Broadway? But we are coming up on the 13th. We're going to be reprising a lot of our stories and evidence as to why the official story is a crock. And over at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, they are moving forward with a major ad campaign, and now we're getting word that one of the 45-foot tall digital billboards near Times Square is just going to be showing endlessly the video of the collapse of World Trade Center 7 right down into its own footprint, looking just like a controlled demolition, which it had to be. Because the only way a building comes down into its own footprint is every single load-bearing member has to be severed at exactly the same time, or the building will flop over onto one side. So good for Richard Gage. I'm glad he got the finances available to get that up there. Now, getting on back to the propaganda trying to sell us a third invasion of Iraq, questions are being raised about Stephen Sotloff and what he was really doing. Was he just an American/Israeli reporter? Was he an intelligence asset? And now there's a video that has surfaced showing Stephen Sotloff handling a machine gun in Syria, taking part in combat operations. Now, maybe he justified that as experience necessary to be a good journalist, or maybe he just felt like having some fun and playing rock and roll with a machine gun. But it certainly indicates that the Syrian people might see him as having a combat role. Now, there's an interesting story over at Gilad Atzmon's website where he is basically blowing the whistle based on an article in Ynet, how Israel's minions around the world are prowling the internet trying to take down or have taken down all the stories that mention the fact that Stephen Sotloff is a dual citizen and has a lot of connections to Israeli, including possibly Israeli intelligence. Because Sotloff spent 3 years at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, an institute that is linked to the Mossad. So they're out there trying to cover their gluteus maximi yet one more time. Now let's talk about the group that supposedly discovered this video. Site Intelligence Group. Okay. Now this is the same organization that found and released a video of Osama bin Laden that was later exposed as a complete fraud. And in another embarrassment, Site Intelligence Group released an image showing Washington, D.C. in devastation, claiming it was part of a presentation made by extremists about the feasibility of nuclear strikes in Washington, D.C. It turned out that image actually came from a computer game, Fallout 3, from U.S. game designers Bethesda Softworks. So it's another reason to doubt the credibility of Site Intelligence as being an intelligence group versus propaganda. And even more damaging, there was an interview, it's on YouTube, we linked it to whatreallyhappened.com, where Rita Katz is out there talking about this latest beheading video and trumpeting the fact that her group found and released it before ISIS had the opportunity to do so. So it just reeks to high heaven. And, of course, SiteGround is linked to the Department of Homeland Security and various Washington think tanks pushing the war agenda. Now, there's a very interesting article that we linked to over at InfoWars where the CIA has admitted to faking videos, and they did back in 2010, where they made a video that was supposed to show whoever was playing Osama bin Laden sitting around a campfire swigging bottles of liquor in order to release it to discredit him with his supporters and followers. But it basically says, yeah, they make fake videos. That's part of their toolkit. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and maybe this is the reason Israel is sending their legions all over the internet to try and erase the link between Steven Sotloff and Israel, because Israel doesn't want to get involved in this fight with ISIS, even though they should be just as angry about it as we, the American people, are being told we should be. And we're hearing from our media, oh, because of the beheadings, we have to go to war in Iraq, and because of this 2, maybe 3 dead reporters, we have to send thousands of young Americans to death and disfigurement. And Israel saying, no, we're not going to have part of that thing. We'll send the Americans, because that's all the Americans are good for, is killing Israel's enemies here. Now, as you know, back during Operation Protective Edge, the Hollywood blacklist hammer came down very hard on Penelope Cruz. And it is a powerful hammer. I have felt its wrath myself. And they tried to counter the negative publicity by getting together 200 Hollywood heavyweights, executives, fading stars, still desperate to cling to fame, to stand up and say, we support Israel no matter what, and was organized by this group, Creative Community for Peace. Saw their website all over the place. I even got emails from them saying, link to us, the Creative Community for Peace. If you have anything to do with entertainment, you will sign up. It turns out it is a front group for the organization Stand With Us, which is a group that supports the continued building of illegal settlements in the West Bank, and they are very tightly tied in with the Israeli government. So all those Hollywood people who showed up for Creative Community for Peace, they got used for propaganda by the government of Israel. Most of them, sadly, probably do not care here. Now, here's a very interesting article that came out of CBC up in Canada, how ISIS sows global panic. ISIS isn't sowing the global panic. Corporate media is. 3 deaths, and it's headline news all over the world. Oh, you should be outraged and angry over these horrible deaths. During the same interval of time, more Americans were wrongfully killed by police and medical mistakes. Nobody says you got to be upset about that. No, you have to be upset about these reporters being beheaded, and we've got to go to war. Nobody talks about war on incompetent doctors or war on police who are murdering 8 times as many innocent Americans as the terrorists do. And Obama's still out there saying, we will always remember those who hurt Americans. But when Israel kills Americans like Fergan Dogan, who was shot in the head by the IDF, or Rachel Corrie, who was run over by an Israeli bulldozer not once but twice, The corporate media and the U.S. government ignores it. The corporate media is in the business of selling you the fear. The corporate media is in the business of telling you what you're supposed to be upset about and what you're not supposed to be upset about. The corporate media is in the business of selling you everything that somebody wants to sell you. A new candidate, a new war, a new car, a new product. That's what they do. People always look at network TV. And they say, what does network TV sell? Oh, they sell candy and they sell clothing and they sell... No. Network television sells you. That's what they make their money on, luring you in with TV shows that are hopefully entertaining but are not going to get you to think during the commercial break. TV shows are designed not to get you to think during the commercial break, because how they make their money is to round up a bunch of people and deliver them in a mentally receptive state for those commercial pitches. Some of those commercials actually cost more to produce than the entire episode of the TV show that is wrapped around them. Huge amounts of money go into these commercials in order to sell you things, whether it is a car, a candidate, a war. That's what they do. That's what they're in their business of doing. And right now they're in the business of convincing you that you have to be absolutely terrified of ISIS. They're going to get you. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. I'm trying to balance my little levels here. And let's see. Going on here, we're still talking about Syria and ISIS. Joe Biden, the vice president, is out there saying, we will follow ISIS to the gates of heck. And, of course, coupled with that is the question, will he get back that $550 million the U.S. gave to this group when they were working for the United States of America against Syria's Bashar al-Assad? The answer is probably no. And we're in this very bizarre situation where the U.S. gives weapons and money to a group to do a task, to destabilize Syria. The group goes rogue. They go into Iraq, and they join with the Iraqi people to kick out the U.S. government in Baghdad. And so now you are, again, expected to pay to go in and smash up all those weapons that you paid for already. Does this sound like wise military policy or even fiscal management? It doesn't matter who wins or who loses or whose side somebody's on, you are expected to pay for it all. And this is why there is no money to repair the American infrastructure, why there's no money to try and revive manufacturing and bring back the high-paying jobs. It's all going on this foreign policy of just giving money and weapons to anybody who's going to help the U.S. do what the U.S. government wants it to do. All in the name of the war for Bretton Woods and the petrodollar. And in the end, you are made to pay for it all. Now, as I mentioned earlier in that phone call, Great Britain has basically stated they do not need the permission of Bashar al-Assad to invade Syria to go after ISIS, whatever they're calling it this week. And so, yeah, they can't come up with a reason to invade Syria based on anything Assad has done, so they create this group, fund them, train them in Jordan, send them on in, and now they're the big boogeyman, and the excuse to invade and conquer Syria is now based on going after the group that the U.S. created in the first place. Do you see how chaotic this is getting? They really have lost control of their foreign policy. They're almost purely reactive at this point. Story out of thestar.com. Canada is getting dragged into this new war in Iraq. And they're saying for better or worse, the West is being drawn into another war in Iraq, the third invasion, and this time Canada's getting involved. Now, turning on down to Israel, we have been commenting on the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas that was negotiated in Cairo to bring an end to Operation Protective Edge, which is being seen by most people as a victory for the people of Gaza who are still there, despite overwhelming military superiority by Israel paid for by you, the American taxpayer. And almost as soon as the ceasefire was over, Netanyahu was out there saying, well, we didn't really give Hamas anything. We didn't agree to anything. And it was either he was trying to placate those people in his own government who were not happy with the ceasefire, or he was just not going to keep to the agreement, and it has now transpired they're not keeping to the agreement. Netanyahu is not sending a new delegation down to Cairo to talk about the extended negotiations regarding seaports and airports. The IDF opened fire on Gaza fishermen fishing in their own coastal waters within 6 miles of the coast. That was one of the agreements of the ceasefire. They're not keeping to that one. And now we're seeing this article out of 972mag.com where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu basically came out and said the occupation will last forever. So Netanyahu has already broke the ceasefire agreement with Hamas, grabbed 1,000 acres near Bethlehem for a new illegal settlement. He's just out there in his arrogance saying, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I don't care what world opinion is. I don't care what international law is. Nobody can touch me. I've got the U.S. to basically back me and protect me no matter what happens. Maybe, maybe not. The Palestinian Authority is still insisting they are going to take the political leadership of Israel before the International Criminal Court over war crimes committed in Gaza. Now, the ICC does not have jurisdiction over nations, but they do have jurisdiction over individuals in those nations. So that is moving forward. Now, we already know that the U.S. has been threatening the Palestinian Authority to cut all financial support if they dare accuse politicians of Israel of war crimes. You can't do that. You can't criticize them. They're Israel. You can't do that. It's just not done. Don't you understand how the world works? The rule of law only applies to everybody but Israel. But it looks like the Palestinian Authority is getting ready to live without the U.S. funding, and they are starting to get additional funding from other countries in the region so they can go on without that extortion, that little piece of blackmail or bribery that's coming in from the U.S. government. Now, over at Al Jazeera, we're seeing continuing fallout from the leakage of documents that confirm that the U.S. government helped Israel create their secret nuclear arsenal. And they're talking about all these records that have come out all the way back to the Kennedy administration. Now, John F. Kennedy knew Israel was trying to build nuclear weapons, and he intended to stop it. He was demanding that Israel sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, allow IAEA inspections. Kennedy was killed and replaced by Johnson, who was strongly pro-Zionist and went along with this idea that Israel could have nuclear weapons. Remember, Johnson helped cover up Israel's attack on the USS Liberty and was quoted as saying, I would rather see that ship and all of those Americans at the bottom of the ocean before I embarrass Israel. And we know that Israel got their first-generation weapons-grade uranium from an American company owned by Israelis called Numex. It was a huge scandal there. There was another scandal at the Savannah River plant where a huge amount of weapons-grade material went missing. And I remember seeing that on TV. What a huge scandal. Everybody was concerned about controlling these nuclear material. And then 24 hours later, the corporate media came out and said, oh, well, it's just assumed that this material has plated itself onto the inside of the plumbing, and there's nothing to worry about, and the story went away. And the implications of these leaks are twofold. First of all, it's another confirmation that Israel does, in fact, have nuclear weapons. They are not this poor, helpless, defenseless nation in the middle of a hostile Middle East that needs our constant financial support to stay alive. It's not true. Second, it tells us that every U.S. president since Lyndon Johnson has known that Israel has nuclear weapons and lied to you when asked about it. And on this article, where we link to it at whatreallyhappened.com, we have the video from Obama's first press conference as president, where he was asked directly by Helen Thomas, what nations in the Middle East have nuclear weapons right now? And Obama danced away from that question, didn't answer it, and Helen Thomas was kicked off the White House press corps. Now, under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and under the Glenn Act, it is illegal for the United States government to send your tax dollars to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty or allow IAEA inspections, which is Israel. They're committing a crime. They're stealing your money to give to their buddies in Israel. It's not legal. And remember, documents that surfaced after the collapse of the former government of South Africa confirmed Israel's been trying to sell clandestine nuclear weapons to other governments, which is the very activity the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as we were talking about in hour number one, we're seeing more and more commentary come out. This one's from Activist Post about how the U.S. policy of interventionism that the U.S. government has been following since the end of World War II is starting to unravel in the face of social media, in the force of the independent media, and especially where the people of eastern Ukraine have adopted a new model of response. See, up until now, the way it worked, whether it was Iran in 1953 or Chile in 1973, the U.S. government would go in and they would kick up a fuss and they would overthrow the democratically elected government of those nations. And then they would put in a new puppet ruler, the dictator Pinochet in Chile, the Shah of Iran in Iran, obviously, and the people of those nations would just go along with that and follow and obey the new U.S. puppet rulers as if they were their own government. And it worked about half the time. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. government has tried to overthrow the governments of 50 different nations on Earth, succeeding 26 times. It's still up in the air whether we can consider Kiev a success or not. But Crimea and eastern Ukraine have changed the process by simply saying, look, under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we have an inalienable right to self-determination. And if there is a government in the capital city that is not elected by us, that is not making decisions in the best interests of the people of the nation, then we have a right to simply split off and start a whole new country. And this, of course, undermines the whole U.S. interventionist policy, and, of course, it is absolutely contrary to the agenda of a single global government. And even Henry Kissinger, in his op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, was saying that the New World Order agenda is in serious, serious trouble. Now then, getting on back to the issue of torture, it's kind of interesting. BBC just ran a story about how torture is rampant in Mexico to extract confessions from criminals, and Amnesty International was in a huff about that. And, of course, I'm sure the Mexicans are saying, look, the Americans are doing it. We figured it was okay for us. I'm waiting for Amnesty International to come in and start screaming bloody murder about all the torture being carried out by the U.S. government, by the CIA. So far. Now, as you know, there are a couple of litigations taking place regarding that very practice. And one of them centers on Mohammed al-Qahtani, who has never been accused, tried, or convicted of any crime. The U.S. government is claiming he's the 20th 9/11 hijacker, even though he did not actually get into the United States. They're just saying, oh, he was going to be a hijacker, and they tortured him in Guantanamo Bay, and he's suing. And unfortunately, the judge in the case has ruled that the video of him being tortured will remain sealed and cannot be shown to the jury. Oh, no, the jury doesn't need to see it. It'll just upset them. They don't need to see that. Just believe it when we tell you all that we did was we pelted him with marshmallows. Now, part of the growing brouhaha over torture, which Obama has now rather casually admitted to, yeah, we tortured some people. You shouldn't think anything wrong of it. Centers on Diego Garcia, which is under the control of Great Britain, and it is home to one of the known CIA torture centers. And documents have been demanded to show the extent of U.S. involvement in torture on Diego Garcia, and the story came back that, well, the records were damaged. You know, the records were stored in a building, and there was a very heavy rain, just absolute storms in June of 2014, and the records were destroyed by water damage. Well, as it turns out, looking at the actual weather records, it turns out total rainfall for June of 2014 was less than half of what it normally gets. And so it's completely destroyed this story that the records are unavailable because of water damage from heavy rain. Probably they're going to come back and say, well, we stored those records on Lois Lerner's hard drive. And the arrogance on display from these people in government who can simply deny records of their wrongdoing by saying, oh, it was lost, it was destroyed, really. Computer hard drive crashes, it's an epidemic problem. And they actually think you're going to believe that here. Now, we reported earlier that GQ magazine honored Tony Blair with their Philanthropist of the Year award. And there was, not surprisingly, a tremendous outcry and backlash on that. And now GQ magazine is having to defend their decision to give Tony Blair this award. And so they're having to do damage control. They've harmed their own reputation, probably harmed their subscription rates, and certainly their newsstand sales. And this is part of the process of taking these war criminals and heaping so many awards on them that people will just say, oh, this person couldn't be a war criminal. He got Philanthropist of the Year, or he got the Nobel Peace Prize. He's got all these gold statues and plaques on the wall telling us that this is a wonderful human being. We can't never believe that this person sanctioned torture or lying to the public to start wars. That's part of the fraud. It's part of the propaganda to frock these war criminals with all kinds of made-up, out-of-thin-air awards to make them look like they're decent human beings. Now, speaking of decent human beings, we mentioned this earlier in the show. Former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell and his wife have been convicted in their corruption trial. 11 counts of guilty on federal corruption charges that carry minimum jail sentences. Now, supposedly, they're going to be sentenced early next year. I don't know why they're putting it on hold for that long while they're looking at the sentencing guidelines, or maybe they're going to wait till after the November elections and Obama's simply going to write a pardon for them. Now, I would be tempted to say don't do the crime if you can't do the time, but as all politicians are crooks, and we've seen politicians get away with corruption and bribery and the rest of it, the targeting of Bob McDonnell may have been more about keeping him out of the 2016 race than the march of justice and honesty in government. We're seeing a lot of that now. It's called de-escaying after Dominique Strauss-Kahn. Find somebody you want out of the way, whether it's Chris Christie and Bridgegate or now McDonnell. They're clearing away the potential competition for the chosen anointed candidates. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Interesting story over in the Daily Telegraph. Apparently, a woman was found beheaded in a garden in London. They've arrested a suspect. And that's the end of it. You know, I thought beheadings were global news, certainly the ones of these American-Israeli journalist spy soldiers in Syria in a war zone. Oh, horrific news. Woman beheaded in London? Bottom of the paper, right above the obituaries. No other mention here. Alrighty, now here's a bizarre story. Apparently over in Russia, one of their lawmakers is proposing a new law in Russia where candidates for elections have to disclose their psychological history, psychiatric problems to the public. And those who try and hide mental disorders will be banned from the polls. I think it's a really good idea, especially looking at some of the nutcases we have in office in this country. Of course, we'll never see it in this country. We're going to have to wait for this government and economy to collapse and part of the blueprint for the new America. Say, yeah, we got some new rules. If you want to be a politician and be elected, we have to know that you're not a sociopathic personality, because those are always big, big troubles. Now, speaking of troubles, the Democrats are basically in a panic because the polls and the early primary results are suggesting that come November, and discounting the effect of massive vote fraud, Democrats are going to lose control of the U.S. Senate. And apparently, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, is showing the signs of the stress because she went out on this rant trying to say that Republican Governor Scott Walker and the Tea Party extremists were the equivalent of women beaters. It's a bit of a reach out there. Now, the other side is not exactly in an area of smooth sailing either, because there's a story over here on CJR.org where apparently Republicans have been caught setting up their own news blogs. Now, they're not identified as being part of the GOP campaign, but they're setting up local, regional news blogs like whatreallyhappened.com, except we're global, and they're filling them with stories to basically target Democrats in battleground congressional districts. And apparently they're at least recognizing that the high ground in the war for the minds of the voters has now shifted to here on the internet. Now, very interesting little story. We linked to an old video, Flashback 2010, Is America Becoming a Third World Country? And it's worth looking at because even back in 2010, they were talking about all the extreme steps being taken, even then, by cities, towns, counties trying to save money, turning off streetlights late at night, turning off every other one. And the situation has only gotten worse since then. We're all looking at what's going on in Detroit and trying to convince ourselves that our own towns and communities are not on the verge of becoming exactly the same situation, but they are. Now, this fall, the charter for the Export-Import Bank expires, and there's a big, huge debate about whether it should be renewed. And the Ex-Im Bank is a federal government agency that subsidizes U.S. exports to other countries. Try and overcome some of the resistance from trying to deal with countries that really are not happy with buying U.S. exported products because of their high costs. So we'll subsidize it here. And the bank itself claims that it is funding neutral, that it doesn't cost the taxpayers a single dime. Republicans have come back and said absolutely not, that in fact the Ex-Im Bank is costing billions of dollars of taxpayer funds to help large corporations get their products into other countries. Now, I want to talk about this thing called Operation Choke Point. It's one of these government programs that sounds good in the soundbite and has gone completely out of control. Now, Operation Choke Point is a government program from the U.S. Department of Justice, the same Department of Justice that insists they don't have any reason to look into what's going on down in Ferguson, because we all know the cops are just wonderful Joes from coast to coast here. But this program, Department of Justice and the FDIC, allows federal agencies to basically intimidate banks and payment processors into ending financial relationships with entities suspected of fraud. But like so many other government programs, it's hitting the wrong people. And it's already caused tremendous harm to pawn shops, short-term lenders, and apparently now they're setting their sights on the casino and gaming industry. And this is turning out to be another complete botch-up, like the no-fly list, which has some 21,000 people now on it, even though since 9/11 nobody's actually caught a terrorist trying to get onto a U.S. aircraft. And we know that most of these 21,000 people have not done anything justifying being on the list. They can be put on the list because of a mistyped key, and there's no mechanism to get innocent people off of it. And so on all these programs, the U.S. government is harming the innocent, failing to catch the guilty, and then has the arrogance to demand that you pay for this continued abuse. Now, getting on over to this immigration situation here, former CBS News correspondent Cheryl Atkinson said the Obama administration is continuing to refuse to tell Congress where these tens of thousands of illegal immigrant children are being sent to. After they're processed through the holding centers on the border, they're put on buses and planes, and they're sent all around the country. We've had some of them show up here in Hawaii. Some of them are all the way up in Alaska. And bringing them to Hawaii and to Alaska, those are plane flights 4 times longer and 4 times more expensive than it would take to simply send them back home and kick them out on the runway. And people are trying to ask, where are these kids going? Because, first of all, it's negatively impacting the local school districts, and some of these kids are carrying contagious illnesses, and the Obama administration is refusing to tell Congress where they're going. It's a big, deep, dark secret. Maybe they just don't know. Maybe they just lost track of them. They put them on the plane and the bus. We don't know where they're going. We don't care. I still am trying to figure out exactly what's going on there. But we know a lot of these kids are going out to California. Story out in Oraz.com. 1 in 10 California workers are an illegal immigrant. So anybody who says the illegals are not taking jobs away from the legals is completely wrong. They're delusional. They need to be one of those people who provide their psychiatric history before accepting public office. Another story out of investmentwatchblog.com. Illegal immigrant-related pandemic diseases are starting to appear across the United States of America. This is a real, demonstrable threat to the well-being of the nation, and Washington, D.C. is completely disinterested. They're just monomaniacally focused on war, war, and more war. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, yesterday we were talking about this amazing video from a recent air show where all of the world's major manufacturers put their latest and greatest aircraft on display. Now, because of the recent engine fires, the F-35, which was supposed to debut there, did not. But the latest Russian jets did, and the video of their performance in the sky was just amazing. And I commented, I don't think we're going to see the F-35 be able to do these kinds of maneuvers. And I got a few emails on that, some of which were a little irate, coming from people who've worked on the project and said, no, this is a great aircraft, so forth and so on here. But it turns out the F-35 is never going to be able to do those maneuvers we saw the Russian jets do, because they've determined what was causing the recent spate of fires where the F-35 would self-immolate. And it turns out the problem is that during high G maneuvers, the engine casing flexes. It distorts under the load, and as a result, the tips of the turbine blades are coming into contact with the edge of the ducting, and the resulting friction is raising the temperature of the ends of the turbine blades to twice what it's normally supposed to experience in operation, leading to fatigue, cracking, and the blades coming off. So, we're not going to see, apparently during high G maneuvers, the engine of the F-35 eats itself. But still, they have confidence. Story over at Reader-supported news. Officially, the U.S. government is still hopeful that its nuclear-capable F-35, already the world's most expensive war machine, might someday work as promised more than a decade ago, and now they're saying it's going to be at least 5 years before it's actually in service. It's starting to be called the zombie fighter. And it's another reminder that we have a federal government that is institutionally incapable of admitting error or backing away from a failure. whether it's the F-35, Obamacare, human-caused global warming, and it is an absolute flustercluck out there with this piece of aircraft. All right, boy, the phone lines just lit up like a Christmas tree. We're going to go to George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
How you doing, Mike? The thing is, I've been hearing people sitting there crying, like down in El Paso, Texas. If anybody's been through El Paso, Texas, they're sitting there going, the borders are wide open, ISIS is coming in, and we're going to be attacked, yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And you got Fort Bliss there and Biggs Airfield there. And the thing is, it's like, Mike, I started looking through some archives, and I asked a few retired JAG lawyers that I know around town, and they're asking the same question. If the borders are wide open and ISIS is getting ready to attack, and we got military installation, said why? Because even legally in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, commanders can be relieved of duty if they do not carry out for dereliction of duty, carrying out a corrupt politician's policy that goes against the interests of the country.
Well, we know the federal government doesn't have much respect for the military in general, and certainly for the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Look at how hard they came down on Lieutenant Aaron Watada, who, under the rules of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, refused to be deployed to Iraq for what was clearly an illegal war of conquest. There's all kinds of pressures that are brought to bear on these base commanders. One issue, remember back on 9/11, there'd been a change in the rules for Air Force base commanders. Prior to that change, an Air Force base commander could deploy his aircraft to deal with an emerging crisis, like when Payne Stewart's Learjet wandered off course. Apparently the cabin depressurized and they all passed out, and the plane was just flying across the sky without anybody alive on board. And they got fighters on the tail of that real quick to find out what was going on. Well, just a couple of months before 9/11, the rules were changed that no air base commander could send their aircraft to intercept off-course civilian planes without the direct permission of Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, who was conveniently unavailable for contact during 9/11. And then right after 9/11, the rule was changed back. So what we need to find out here right now is, are these Army base commanders being told that they may not deploy their troops without direct permission from Washington, D.C.? Because if that is now the new reality, then somebody wants that border open. And you're absolutely right. This open border, it's not only bringing in all these illegal immigrants, it's bringing in all these contagious illnesses, and it is wide open. They're out there screaming, ISIS is coming to get us, and they've got the door wide open and the red carpet out, and you have to wonder, what the heck are these people thinking?
Well, I just think, I hope, Mike, I hope a retired military JAG officer calls into your show, because I'm sitting there also reading. It's like I say, commanders can be relieved and be arrested, and also because this is dereliction of duty. You don't give aid and cover to your enemies, or allow to demise your country.
ISIS is in a gray area because there are friends inside Syria. There are only our enemies in Iraq. We gave them $550 million. And train these guys up. So it's kind of hard to say that these are enemies of the American people when our tax dollars basically created this group.
Well, I'm wondering, I'm scratching my head. Where those airplanes go in Libya, and where these heat-seeking missiles. And I just think the ISIS bluff is a bluff on the border, too.
Of course it's a bluff. It's a bluff. ISIS is being used to justify going into Syria and going back into Iraq. But ISIS is not in Libya, so they got to come up with something else to get us all hot and bothered to fling our children onto Libya's bayonets.
But one thing I think we really need to do when we get this country back is the president may be commander-in-chief, but the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the appointment of officers, is under the Constitution is to be placed with Congress, not with the president changing rules. Because Congress should have stepped in saying, who made these rule changes?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the president is doing what he can get away with, but Congress was supposed to. Under the Constitution, Congress is supposed to hold the executive branch in check. The executive branch works for the Congress. Congress creates the law. The executive branch executes the law. That's the way it's supposed to be working. The president is not the creator of laws and rules.
and it's not his military. The Congress has oversight over the military, and the only time the president's commander-in-chief is when there's an actual declaration of war. And then he's the commander-in-chief.
Well, you have to remember the War Powers Act, which in an age before instantaneous global communications allowed the president to deploy U.S. military forces to deal with a crisis. What we're seeing now, though, is the president creates a crisis and then uses it to send in the military forces, and Congress just goes on looking the other way.
Well, I think the War Powers Act needs to be rescinded. Well, thank you, Mike.
Well, it needs to definitely be altered. And, George, we're going to let you go. We got a bunch of callers. Dustin in New Jersey, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I wanted to make a quick comment on a caller a while ago. We said that, this was all about, Ukraine was all about Syria and then Iran, but I don't think that. I think that those two have been put on hold to go after the third jump right to Russia. Because, like I said, you said it yourself, the Paris Air Show had the Su-35s, and you got the F-35 that's still in limbo. These certain decisions have been made. I believe that it's.
Well, I think it's a lot simpler. I think it's a lot simpler than that. Here, we know that Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this plan to conquer all of these oil-producing nations and get them back into the petrodollar. But I think because it's not going well and they're running out of resources, they decided to change the plan and just go right to the top and deal with the ruble and the yuan and get it over with. And I think that's what's driving this agenda to provoke Russia. And clearly that explains why Obama is already in there trying to derail this pending ceasefire with Kiev and the Eastern republics.
Yeah, right. Because look at the BRICS. They got all these deals have been moving forward quicker than they're expecting. So it's a strategy to go right for Russia, because then you would call off Syria and Iran if you cut off Russia by some small chance. Yeah,
I can feel the panic and the desperation coming out of the Beltway right now. And the propaganda's reactive, the military actions are reactive. They've lost the initiative in this campaign, and that means ultimately they have in fact lost this war. They won't admit it. They won't back off of it. They'll stick with it just like they're sticking with Obamacare and the F-35, and that is a major problem when you're dealing with a war that could potentially go nuclear.
Well, Russia's got 10-year advance in missile tech, and then after you get past that, you got to go up against their fighters. So there's no way. There's no strategy. It's impossible to get past.
There's a lot of wishful thinking is going on. All right, we got to let you go and do our top of the hour break. Ron in Missouri, please stay on the line. I'm going to take your call as soon as we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Scott is still doing a magnificent job answering the phones and getting people queued up. And we're going to go to a phone call right now. Ron in Missouri. Aloha, Ron. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. You were mentioning testing in England for politicians?
In Russia.
In Russia?
Yes.
I think you ought to take it one more step. I think you ought to take hair follicles and do a drug test on everybody who wants to run.
That would probably, I think we ought to have regular drug testing of everybody in office all during the time they're in office. I mean, they're out there screaming that students have to be drug tested and athletes have to be drug tested. I'm sorry, athletes don't really change the course of history in this country. And we've got all of these people in Washington, D.C. trying to really crank up World War III. I think a big part of the problem is the excessive overdependence on these antidepressants, which we know can trigger very bizarre thought processes in people. So I'm in agreement with you. Let's drug test them. If somebody wants to be in a position of power and authority in this country, they ought to be under more scrutiny than the ordinary people, not the other way around, which is what we have here. Apparently, the NSA is sharing all of the information they steal from you with police all across the country. It's a program called IC Reach, where ordinary police officers can type on that little laptop in their car, and whatever the NSA has on you, they can get immediately. The NSA is not watching foreign terrorist threats. They're watching you to try and scare you into silence and obedience, and frankly, it's not working.
And also have it done by independent labs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we're looking at all of these U.S. government agencies like CDC and FDA have been compromised on the vaccine autism situation. We know that, as you heard on the SRN news break, the courts have ruled that British Petroleum was negligent down there in the Gulf of Mexico, but you need to remember the Minerals Management Service was supposed to be keeping an eye on all of this hardware down there, including the Deepwater Horizon, and they looked the other way. Just like the Securities Exchange Commission looked the other way for 12 years while Bernie Madoff cheated his investors out of $65 billion. These government agencies are basically put up there to make it look like the government's taking care of you, but they aren't.
Well, keep it up, Mike. You did a great job.
Thank you very much. I will continue to do that here. Now, getting on back to domestic issues. You probably all remember this whole stink over the Bureau of Land Management out in Nevada at the Cliven Bundy Ranch. And they were forced to back down in the face of public outrage and the realization that under the enclave clause of the Constitution, the federal government is not allowed to own and control any land other than what is under federal government buildings or military reservations. That's it. And that clause was put into that Constitution by the Founding Fathers to prevent the federal government from simply grabbing all the land away from the American people and then turning around and selling it off when they got into financial trouble. It was an effort to keep the federal government responsible. And it hasn't lasted, but then Thomas Jefferson didn't think it was going to last. He knew what politicians were. And he expected the government that he invented was only going to last about 100 years. And then it would become so corrupt and rotten, there'd have to be another revolution and redesign a new government for the time. However, it turns out here in northerncountrygazette.com, there's an article about the Bureau of Land Management wanting to round up horses on the free range to remove them from public lands. And apparently there's a lawsuit, and it's going before a judge, to have an emergency motion to block the Bureau of Land Management's horse roundup until this can go through the court system as to whether they have legal jurisdiction to be doing this. Which brings us to the California drought. They're in serious trouble out there. And we've been looking at how all these bottled water companies are draining the aquifers so they can bottle the water, put it in the supermarket, and sell it at a much higher price. We've been talking about the failed collapsing infrastructure. The aqueducts are all cracked. Millions of gallons of water are being leaked out of cracked water mains and aqueducts into places where it doesn't do any good. And it turns out there's another player in this situation. And it's the Environmental Protection Agency, or at least the Endangered Species Act. Apparently, last December, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service issued what is known as a biological opinion, which imposed water restrictions on the San Joaquin Valley to safeguard the federally protected delta smelt, a fish, little tiny fish. And as a result of that ruling, tens of billions of gallons of water from the mountains east and north of Sacramento were channeled away from farmers and simply dumped into the ocean. Good planning there, people. And it's another reminder that to this government, human beings are apparently on the same level with the spotted owl, the delta smelt, and certain protected snails. They're more concerned about protecting these creatures than human beings. Now, don't get me wrong. I love nature, what little of it really exists. Well, actually, it's all still nature. I'm part of nature. This computer's part of nature. It's our nature to make things. But call me speciesist or biased toward my own species. I think the government of the United States of America, of the people, by the people, and for the people, have to put people as a higher priority and say that if taking care of this delta smelt is going to result in human farms running out of water, I think the smelt is going to have to take care of itself. It's another botched, boneheaded decision that has made an already bad problem far, far worse, along with the negligence of our critical national infrastructure. Because out in the western part of the United States, it is naturally desert. And it is kept in a condition to support agriculture by these artificial works, these aqueducts, irrigation systems, and they are in terrible disrepair. It's estimated that all across the West, the aqueduct systems, the irrigation systems are only delivering about 1/3 of the water that they did when they were brand new, and the rest is just lost. So as long as we have an infrastructure that we're not going to repair that's only delivering 30% of the water it's supposed to, let's divert tens of billions of gallons of water into the ocean to protect this fish. Does this sound like good governance to you? It doesn't to me. I'd like to see the Delta smelt, be happy and comfortable. But we have to see human beings be happy and comfortable first. And I absolutely reject any government policy that places the needs of a fish above the needs of the human population. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And apparently down in San Diego, in the Birdland area, they've had another water main break. 18-inch cast iron pipe broke and flooded streets and garages. It's all falling apart. It has not been taken care of. Because government is choosing, government is prioritizing, and our priority right now is war on Iraq and war on Syria and war on Iran and war on China and war on Russia and war on everybody. We can't afford to spend the U.S. taxpayer dollar on the U.S. taxpayer. Where do you think that's going to get us? It's amazing. There's been another hate crime hoax at a Virginia college. And apparently it resulted in a lockdown of the campus because of signs white only and colored on doors and water fountains, and it turned out the student who did this is herself black. Hate crime hoaxes. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we were talking about this IC Reach program in which the NSA, which is collecting all of this data on all of the American people, in complete violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, is sharing all of that with police forces and other government agencies willy-nilly, without any control or restriction. And apparently there is a new revelation from Edward Snowden that this information is going out to corporations. And the NSA has been collecting your medical records, resumes, academic transcripts, and of course, if you take a photo of yourself, a selfie, to send to your lover, that's being collected as well. And apparently there is a story out there where this woman whose private communications were collected by the NSA was contacted by a corporate media reporter for an interview based on her correspondence, which he had read. So this material is winding up in the newsrooms of these large corporate newspapers and TV news departments. Remember, when this whole scandal broke, I said the reason you should be upset is because this government cannot be trusted with your personal private data. And that's absolutely what's going on right now. They're treating that data like it's their property. They're treating you like you are their property. There is a reason the Founding Fathers put that Fourth Amendment in the Bill of Rights, in recognition that when government has a self-declared authority to simply peer into your private lives, that they will do whatever they feel like with that information. Remember the huge scandal up at Seattle at the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference? U.S. government intelligence agencies working on the taxpayer dollar were stealing business secrets from conference attendees to give to cronies of then-President Clinton. It is completely out of control. All righty. Now, you probably heard there was this town, the Willingboro Township, over in New Jersey, and they have a recreation center that was named for John F. Kennedy. And they announced they were going to rename it after Obama. And apparently it triggered a huge backlash and outrage among the townspeople. And Tuesday, the town council voted 5-0 to cancel the decision and keep the name John F. Kennedy on this recreational center. So I guess we have our target for the next domestic false flag terror attack, don't we? Sometimes presidents can act very, very spoiled. I remember back during the Bush administration, there was what was called the Liberty Dollar, and it was a silver or gold coin for wealth preservation. Nobody paid any attention to it. Well, people were buying it. And dollar is not trademarked to the U.S. government. Other countries use the name dollar. Zimbabwe did. They abused it rather badly. Local communities have trade dollars. It's not a copywritten situation. And then the Liberty Dollar made the mistake of putting Ron Paul's face on one of their coins. And at that point, the Department of the Treasury and the FBI and all the rest of these people came on in and shut the Liberty Dollar down, confiscated all their metal, under the claim that because the coins had the word dollar on them, that it represented an attempt to counterfeit U.S. currency. And if you remember what the coins actually looked like, there was no possible way you could confuse the Liberty Dollars and the Ron Paul dollars with U.S. coinage, especially because U.S. coinage doesn't have Ron Paul on it. And I think what happened was George Bush got his feelings hurt because the Liberty Dollar wanted to put Ron Paul on the coin instead of George Bush. And that's why the wrath of the government came down on the Liberty Dollar. Okay, let's talk about some science and health stories here. As you know, we've been dealing with the aftermath of a whistleblower from the CDC who has gone public, acknowledging that the CDC study that supposedly disproved a link between vaccines and autism was a fraud. That data that supported the link was simply ignored and rejected and discarded to come up with a desired conclusion to reassure all Americans that, yes, you can go and buy and use these vaccines and they will not cause your children any harm, even though the evidence they had in hand said exactly the opposite. Apparently, according to John Rappaport, there's another leaker that has come forward from the FDA saying exactly the same thing. These government agencies engage in fraud and conspiracy, not to protect the public health, but to protect the profitability of these large corporations. And remember, when government power is aligned with corporate power, that is fascism. And that's where we are right now. We are no longer a capitalist nation. We're not a democracy. We are not even a republic anymore. We are a fascist economic dictatorship with trappings of some kind of democratic process, most of which is fraud. World Health Organization is concerned about a second Ebola cluster that has erupted inside Nigeria. And apparently the concern is that this represents a lapse in the quarantine around the first cluster of Ebola cases in Lagos. So it is a reminder they're not dealing decisively with this spread of this very serious and mutating illness. Report out of MSN down in New Zealand, Ebola death toll more than 1,900. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot of people. In a world with more than 7.5 going on 8 billion human beings, 1,900 doesn't sound like a lot. We've lost more than that in the wars. The problem is infection patterns are exponential, and the longer they go without some kind of control or intervention, the faster the infection rates go up. The number of people being infected goes up. The number of people dying goes up as an exponential function. Now, there's a new Ebola outbreak over in Senegal, and it's concerning a lot of people because the outbreak is at the capital city, Dakar, which is a major hub for air travel all over Africa, all over Europe, even to the United States of America. And Joanne Liu, the international president of the Global Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, stated at the UN that they're losing the battle to contain the disease and leaders are failing to come to grips with this transnational threat. Of course, our government's all about starting wars. They can't be bothered with Ebola. They'll deal with it next year. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the situation with Ebola, and there's a story coming out of Japan Times that Japanese researchers have developed a new test for Ebola that returns a result in just 30 minutes. The current tests can take several days, which is a very, very long time to wait if your doctors are telling you you may have a disease that is going to kill you. And the new method is very simple, and it can be used in places where they don't have expensive testing equipment, which is not going to go over well with these corporations that manufacture and sell expensive testing equipment. And hopefully this test is not going to get the false negatives that the current test is doing with this rapidly mutating virus. Now, Beppe Grillo, who used to be a comedian, and now he is a politician, is out there suggesting that people with infectious diseases have to be quarantined. And amazingly enough, a director from the World Health Organization, in an interview in The Local, said that doesn't make any sense. So I don't understand what the World Health Organization is thinking. If you have a population of people with a highly contagious, seriously lethal disease, quarantine is the normal procedure. Unless somebody wants this disease to get out there to stimulate fear so that you'll run down and buy vaccines. Or maybe this is Agenda 21, depopulation, the Georgia Guidestones, saying reduce the human population to only 500 million. So far, Ebola is confined to Africa. That is consistent with National Security Study Memorandum 200, which set as U.S. official policy back during the Nixon administration the covert, clandestine depopulation of regions of the world with vast natural resources desired by U.S. corporations, to prevent those people who live there from using those resources and from having a population large enough to resist U.S. intervention. Now, remember what I said about all this spying going on, and it's all one way. There's this very interesting story out of NewJersey.com here. Apparently in the city of Helmeta, there was a bit of a scandal where a police officer was caught on a cell phone video making controversial remarks about President Barack Obama. And now the Helmeta Borough Council is considering new rules that would ban people from using smartphones or digital cameras inside the public buildings, other than for declared public meetings. So if you're just walking around the building and you take out your cell phone or your digital camera, you would be in trouble here. Now, one of the founding principles of the United States of America is that it is a nation of laws that apply to all equally. Yet here we see a government that presumes to watch us with TV cameras everywhere we go, listen to our phone calls, read our emails, steal our business secrets, our medical records, and then turning around and saying we are forbidden from recording them. Now, we know that even though the courts have consistently ruled that the American people have a right to take pictures of and videotape the police on duty in the public space, we know the police are continuing to take the idea that there's some kind of an imaginary law that says that they can take cameras away from you if you're taking images of them behaving badly, which seems to be happening more and more. Now, here's a very bizarre story. This is out of RINF.com. Apparently up in New York, the New York Police Department has filed hate crime charges against Rosella Best for apparently posting graffiti critical of the New York Police Department. So the New York Police Department is now trying to say that criticism of the police is now a hate crime. No, it isn't. It is First Amendment protected speech. Redress of grievances. against police departments that are becoming abusive. Remember that Empire State Building shootout? 9 bystanders shot, all by the New York Police Department. And it's not just here in the United States of America. Story out of Exaro News. As you know, there is this huge scandal involving a pedophile network that includes stars of the media, stars of the BBC, and major politicians in the British government. And it's just sort of being thrown off to one side. Well, apparently Scotland Yard has intentionally delayed 200 charges stemming from this investigation out of concern that it might trigger a media frenzy and the British people waking up and realizing that the kind of people who seek and win public office in their government are really not very nice human beings to begin with. And remember, we had a similar scandal here in the United States of America. It was called the Franklin scandal. And that one was hushed up. There was actually a documentary that was produced and was going to air on TV, and members of Congress went to the cable channel and said, if you air that, we will pass laws that will destroy your business. And the airing was canceled. All the videos of this documentary were bought up by an unknown purchaser and apparently destroyed. But one editing tape survived, which is now all over the net. The Franklin scandal reached all the way into the White House. It involved the Boys Town home. And we look at this behavior of politicians and the clergy, and we have to wonder, is this just part of the psychology of people who seek these positions of authority and power? Or are they just so used to getting whatever it is that they want that they don't get a thrill out of life anymore? And this is their way of getting their adrenaline up to engage in such socially unacceptable behavior. But I'm in agreement with that Russian lawmaker that we should not allow anybody into a position of power in the government, in the church, in finance, until we know that they are not suffering from these kind of psychological problems. We know how dangerous sociopaths are because they can lie to you without feeling any guilt about it, no signal that they're lying. And we ought not to allow mentally ill people in these positions of authority. I mean, there are already, steps to keep mentally ill people from being airline pilots or bus drivers, or certainly if you have any kind of mental illness, they won't allow you to purchase a gun. I think we ought to have the same rules applying to people who are in positions of power that can seriously change our lives, the course of the nation. All righty. Let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. Snow is in Alberta. We know over the weekend it was in Wyoming and Alaska. And everybody says, well, Alaska's supposed to be cold. Not during the summer. Remember, during the summer, the sun is up 18, 20 hours out of every single day. Summers in Alaska are beautiful. And there's snow there. And even the Alaskan media is saying this is unusually early. All the signs are out there saying this is going to be a brutal, harsh winter. And the carbon Nazis are already out there saying, no, there's no relation between climate and weather. The weather can be cold, but the climate, it's getting warmer, and it's your fault. They're still trying to sell this lemon. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as we were talking about in the last segment, the carbon Nazis are still out there trying to salvage their human-caused global warming fraud. And they've got lots of money to hire lots of scientists and lots of correspondents and prostitutes in the corporate media to keep selling this. But a lot of the media are starting to back off because they realize they're destroying what's left of their own credibility on this. And over at the UK Guardian, the Daily Mail, they have this article acknowledging there has been no global warming for 19 years. An analysis of the raw temperature data before the carbon Nazis tinker with it show that Earth's temperature has remained constant since 1995. Actually, gone into a little bit of a decline, but they're saying it's close enough to be constant here. So they're trying to sort of ride the middle ground, saying, well, the warming isn't happening, but they're not ready to admit there's actually been cooling here. Now, another story coming out of the Star is trying to claim that human-caused global warming causes the polar vortex, which is bringing all this cold weather all over the place. They're back to this whole thing that global warming causes cold weather. It's not what they were saying back in 2000. UK Independent headline, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. 2009, the UK Met Office predicted a snow-free winter for Great Britain, and they got hammered. The real world is not going along with their dire prognostications. Over at the Daily Mail seems to be reporting actual news here. I'm going to have to tip the hat to them a little bit. Return of Arctic ice cap as it grows by 29% in a year. This is the summer Al Gore predicted an ice-free Arctic, and it did not happen. At the very most generous, you can say, is he's flat out wrong and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And you need to remember, Al Gore's a politician. He's not a scientist. We've got him on video saying the temperature of the Earth's core is millions of degrees. Now, here's a very deceptive story, and this one was over at Oraz.com. New study concludes there is a 99.999% certainty humans are driving global warming. And the actual study says that global warming would not have been as great if humans were not around. Well, that, of course, makes a huge amount of sense. There's no question human activity creates heat. So does the sun. Other animals create heat, warm-blooded animals. Insects, organic decay generates heat. And, of course, geothermal phenomenon powered by radioactive decay deep inside the Earth. The question is, how big is the human contribution to the overall thermal state of the planet? And it is minuscule. It is minuscule. And the use of the word driving in the headline is absolutely, completely inappropriate and unsupported by the study they claim to be citing. And the carbon Nazis are getting desperate. Sir Paul Nurse is out there saying climate skeptics should be crushed and buried. So much for rational debate based on the facts. We've had other carbon Nazis, and they all probably invested all their money in Al Gore's carbon scheme, and they're losing money left and right, and they're very unhappy about that, talking about arresting climate skeptics, denying them their right to free speech. They're dangerous to the planet. No, we're dangerous to their wallets. We're dangerous to the fraud. You don't need to listen to me. We'll come back to this next spring. I think it's going to be an absolutely horrible winter for the Northern Hemisphere. Remember last year? Snowed on Cairo, snowed on the pyramids for the first time in 100 years. This winter will be worse. I'm not the only one saying that. The Old Farmer's Almanac, which has this amazing track record for predicting long-term weather patterns, they're saying it's going to be a harsh, harsh winter. All right, TEPCO is confirming that wreckage from part of the Fukushima power station that collapsed in a recent earthquake did in fact hit some of the spent fuel rods. They're unable to fully evaluate the damage, mostly because they can't get close. The radiation is so severe, even the robots fry going in there. The question is, are these rods still in cooling water? Are they exposed to the air? Because if they're exposed to the air, it's only a matter of time before they ignite. Another story coming out of RINF.com here. Apparently, the GMO companies and their allies have spent $15.2 million lobbying against laws that would allow labeling of genetically engineered food. Huge amounts of money being spent to conceal from you what you're eating. I think just on an absolutely moral level, the idea that you are not supposed to know what you're eating is wrong. Of course you should know what you're putting in your body. Apparently over in India, Monsanto has funded trips for members of the Indian Parliament. A week-long junket to the United States, funded by Monsanto. And apparently this was in response to the blocking of an effort to conduct field trials for 15 genetically modified crops inside India. So Monsanto's bringing them to the U.S., whining, dining them, taking them to Disneyland. It's amazing here. Now, down in Mexico, apparently there was a bit of an upset where a judge down in Mexico is blocking a move by Monsanto to force GMO corn into their agricultural system. And we're seeing in Europe and Latin America, the tide is turning against GMO and in support of independent food growers and consumers' rights. Monsanto wants a world in which we're all dependent on their laboratory creations to maximize the profitability by denying us a choice to any alternatives. And the danger there is, what if they make a mistake? And they provably already have. They're tinkering with the code of life. This is far more dangerous than even nuclear energy in terms of the ramifications of a mistake. Because if you make a mistake with a reactor, you cover it over and you try and deal with it, and it's pretty much, that's the end of it. But if you create a dangerous gene and it breaks into the wild, there's no taking it back. And we already know they've been playing with one gene, the epicite gene, that if it breaks into the wild, represents a major extinction level event for the human population. All in the name of profits, profitability. Apparently here in the Pacific Ocean, tuna fishing is suspended because the tuna population is dangerously low. It's been overfished. Or they've died of radiation, I'm not sure. Apparently somebody just hacked healthcare.gov and planted malicious software, malware, on healthcare.gov. So people who were signing up for Obamacare are getting their computers infected. Nothing from the NSA about finding these people either here. Still hearing the ramifications about all these nude photos of celebrities that have been hacked out of the cloud. Kate Upton pictures. Apparently pictures people just take of their kids having baths at home are being denounced as child pornography out there available on the public. Goodwill Store and 20 others in Topeka been hit by a data breach. Maybe they're pre-selling the virtual 9/11. And this story coming out of RINF.com, apparently some of the hacks appear to be using U.S. government spyware. Maybe it is the NSA doing all of this. There's the music. It's time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow, Friday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, stay angry. Share what you know with who you know. Please tell your friends about Genesis Communications, what really happened. Spread the word. We need to reach all of America if we're going to stop this war before it goes nuclear. Aloha, America.